If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Level Up Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me in person, well, not in person, but virtually, I've got Josh.
I'm a person.
Throwing him off, as always.
I just happen to be in a different city than you are.
So I got we had done a cross promotion with a bunch of different podcasts. The Dungeon Masters Dojo podcast, which started shortly after our podcast. I think we actually were part of their inspiration for starting the podcast. They were the first people we ever interviewed on the podcast when I was with Jared. They have recorded their final episode of their podcast, and so they're going to go away and just go back to playing games and enjoying games. So I wanted to give them a shout out because they were, such an integral part to like the start of this podcast. They had a very big following as far as podcasts go, and as long as the discography is still out there, you should go listen to them. They've got a lot of great information. So just thought I'd throw that out there at the start of this and say it's been a good run for you guys. Really appreciate you and all of the help you've given this podcast throughout the years. So, how are you doing, Josh?
I'm doing pretty good. I had a pretty good evening so far. When my wife came home, we packed up the kids and we walked on downtown to one of the local watering holes, and they've got half-price pizza today. So we had some pizza and some beers.
How was the pizza?
I've had better, but it's half-priced.
Price is right. So
yeah, the price is great. I think that's one of the real benefits of living in the area that I'm not. It's not urban. It's suburban where I'm at, but we're not like out in the serious burbs where walking to the downtown is going to take you some serious effort. It's a 5-minute walk to our little downtown area. I can hop on the train, make it to the city.
Yeah, you're within city proper, so I mean it makes things a lot better. And
we've got a lot of options where we're at.
Yeah. We've already in the past we've talked about being in a place that's sparse and the rural campaign, but it's a little bit different when you are living in a city.
Yeah, you have
pizza
options. You half-price pizza. I think every campaign should have half-price pizza night.
There you go.
That's how you do it. That's how you make your games better.
Obviously, we're going to be talking about a city campaign here, but how will you structure a city campaign, or what do you think a city campaign looks like?
Well, I would like to first start, before we talk about like developing a city campaign or talking about a city campaign, is I would like to talk about one of our Let's Make a One-Shots.
Okay. Oh, yes. I forgot that you actually ran this.
I did. We talked about it, and I did it, and it actually fits within the context of the rest of our topic. Fantastic. So we want to talk about making a campaign within a city, and one of the recent Let's Make a One-Shots, I don't know where it fits. We've recorded it in the past, but wherever it happens to drop is wherever it drops. Was the Pop-Up Spirit Halloween.
Yes, the Pop-Up Spirit Halloween store.
And so I took that and I ran with it. And my Tuesday night gaming group were sort of in between different campaigns. And I offered to run one-shots using Cairn. They seem to really like it because it's quick, it's easy, it doesn't take any real effort to figure out how the characters work. So it's more about telling the story and getting invested in actually what's going on. It's not a whole bunch of different roles. It's just talking through different things. And we ran Pop-Up Spirit Halloween as sort of a 2-night event. It is a one-shot, but we were futzing around with the new Dungeons and Dragons in my VTT to see if it would work the first night, and it does not. So I'm gonna have to fix that.
Probably another topic we'll talk about. Not the fact that your VT2 didn't work, but more the just the concept of what's going on with the new Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Like that is a whole other topic.
I don't want to sidetrack.
But we got in, and first night we did all of the investigation, and it was great. At one point, one of my players quipped, "Oh, I know what's going on. This is a Spirit Halloween bullshit." And I had to stop myself, and I paused too long, to which point everyone's like, "Oh yeah, this is definitely a Spirit Halloween thing."
Were you trying to be stealthy with it, and it he figured it out?
I wasn't trying to be stealthy with it, but it was very funny. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I actually ended up doing 7 NPCs overall.
A little bit more than what we recommended.
Well, it was one NPC who is the seer that we talked about.
Yeah.
I made Gertie Figsworth. She's a medium who's seeing these dead people, and they're a little too corpulent. And then I made 5 vendors or artisans that had been taken over. They actually had figured out where to go by the 4th one. The first 2, they were sort of like, I don't know what's going on. The 3rd one, they're like, okay, let's investigate a little bit more. The 4th one, like, oh, let's investigate and sort of put the pieces together. And then they headed off towards the wizard-ish person. And I had some fun with the names too, because that's what I do. I had a blacksmith named Flint Smith. The basket maker was Hugo Weaver.
Of course.
The sign maker, an inker or painter, was Jacqueline Kirby, as is Jack Kirby. And then for fun, I pulled the name Alatar Bismora from, I believe it's the Cimmerillion as the name of the wizard. Yeah, I know.
I got no idea. You're hitting me with some obscure reference. I don't know.
Yeah. It's obscure enough that somebody that knows it's like, oh, but everybody else is like, that's totally a wizard name. And it was fun. And then the second night, we came back last night, and I sort of stretched out the final encounters as opposed to just being a single endeavor. I did it like a 2-room thing where they had to fight the shopkeepers that are now turned into monsters without killing them, and then figure out the summoning circle while ghosts were swarming around. And that took the entire evening. It was great. It was just absolutely wonderful. We only do like 3-hour sessions at a night, but like
still, that's you're looking at what, an hour and a half per combat, depending on how much you you talked at the beginning and in the end. So pretty good.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Like the whole thing worked out really well. There's a couple of things that I just really want to drive home when we're talking about this, is that this was a city campaign. Like, these players were existing within a city, so they were walking from site to site. They encountered various other shops. They encountered the shopkeepers, and I went full on shopkeepers are acting weird. So I was acting that out, and I was using specific phrases like, we're trying to get into the spirit of things. And so they then decided, well, I don't know if these are how just shopkeepers are in general in the city. So we want to go to other shops to like compare and contrast. And that was an experience. And that was one of those things that like they were following through with the, like, we're in a city, there's a lot of options. We can go from place to place and sort of compare, and there's different things we can do. And it gave a lot of opportunities for role playing without combat, and I think that's one of the real benefits to the environment that we're playing in.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. There is a kind of motto that Jared lived by with one of his games, which took place in like a city, which is there's a story behind every door.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so like I think in a city campaign, I mean you can apply that to anywhere, but in a city you have so many doors that your players could open up any one of them or be invited into a location at any place. And yes, there's a story there. You can do something with all of that. So whereas in the rural campaign you had the stretched out kind of vastness of things, you can kind of incorporate different styles of role playing there. In the city game, there's a lot of closeness, a lot of camaraderie, a lot of social interaction going on, like everywhere you go, basically.
Yeah, and one of the other things that happens in a city game, and something that they really sort of drilled down into, was that while there's a lot of stories going on, while there's a lot of options that are happening, it doesn't mean that any of the stories are necessarily interacting. It's just too much going on at one point. So the random shop that they walked into had no idea about the weirdness that was going on just in the other room, just across the street.
Yeah, you have a lot of disconnected social connections through the city game. So a lot of people don't get into other people's businesses. It's not a small town sort of thing where everybody knows everybody. It's I don't know the shop owner across the street. I know that they peddle in these wares, but I don't know anything else about them.
Mm-hmm.
Nor do I care.
Yeah, because everybody's living their own life rather than these are the only people we get to interact with, so everybody knows each other, which is what you see in small towns. So I think part of that really leads into what we wanted to talk about, which was creating a city campaign. This was a one-shot, and one-shots are inevitably over and done with. But the whole Cairn thing is supposed to be sort of the in-between games when we're, I'm waiting for other people to come up with stories. I'm just going to throw out a couple of one-shots, and they're going to play them. And the story is pretty much that they're mercenaries who have just come and arrived in a town, a big city, and that gives a lot of opportunities for different jobs that might come their way. Right? They're trying to build their own guild hall. And that was the other part about the Pop of Spirit Halloween was that they wanted to get paid. So I absolutely paid them in exposure. They were none too happy about the fact that every single one of the people gave them, hey, we're going to hire you for jobs, or I can paint your sign, or I can totally be your the guild blacksmith and help you out with stuff. Like they got no money out of the whole thing. It was great. But a city campaign relies on a lot of connections, a lot of options, and the fact that, yes, like you said, there's a story behind every door.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's you think about the vastness of like a big city. I mean, even like a moderately sized city, and you think about how much you could do in just like, again, when we've talked one shots, you think like, okay, like a city block. You've got so much area to kind of work with there, and so many different places to be able to run different, different game types and settings. Like you never have to leave the city to have your campaign evolve and go to kind of the next level. So I think that's what's really interesting about the city campaign is that it is your playground. Like your limits are almost like your city walls or just outside the city walls. Mm-hmm. And there's just so much that you can end up doing there. It makes for a very good social game or a very good investigative game just because of the nature of the closest of everything. You're like, you wonder who really is connected or who isn't connected. It offers a lot of intrigue in that regard.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of really great games that are set in cities. If you look at pre-mades from Dungeons and Dragons, from Wizards of the Coast, or TSR if you want, there's like the Waterdeep Dragon Heist. There's some of the Baldur's Gate games, Icewind Dale. There are games that exist within the cities, and you never really have to leave the city to experience the whole of a story because there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Right? And intrigue, mystery, murder, adventure, all these things can happen without ever having to leave the city walls. There is so much to explore, even if it is not man-made. It could be orc-made or wizard-made or whatever it is. But it exists within those city walls. And there's just a lot of options. You don't ever have to like worry about traversing the wilderness without having to, experience a new thing. A new adventure can be down the block. And that's fun. Yeah.
That's a nice thing about the city campaign. And I think you're never starved for NPCs. Or you're never starved for something that, like, if the players want an obscure shop, it's there. It's much harder to do that in a rural campaign, okay? Because you might have a very defined number of locales or something like that. It's like, no, we don't have one of those here in this town.
In fact, it's much more fun to have them. If you have a weird shop in a rural campaign, it stands out, right?
Yes, it's a very big set piece. You probably almost consider that to be part of your plot.
Yeah.
In a city campaign, it could just be something innocuous.
Yeah, you just have those in a city, and you're like, oh yeah, that shop. We don't go to that shop, and people who go to that shop, those are weird people. But you can have those sort of things in a city campaign. You can sort of like lay out the different parts of a city and where things belong, and have a little bit of fun with it. I think that mysteries are a real big benefit to a city campaign because there are so many things that go on there. That's why you've got all the cop shows are set in New York, right?
Yep.
Because it's a big city, mysteries. You've got a ton of things going on. There's a ton of different people you can meet. And I think that's a great place to start when you're looking at any sort of mystery story, is look to cop shows. Look at what's the one? The one by Dick Wolf. What am I thinking of?
The Law and Order.
Law and Order. Yes, look at Law and Order. Oh my God. Sorry. Look at Law and Order when we talk about mysteries, because just the way they set up these stories is exactly how you want to set up a story in a urban environment. Okay. You've got a base mystery. You've got a small cast of NPCs, but they could be all over the place. And the people that you involve should relate to the story. Right? You don't want to be doing just like random NPCs that people meet. NPCs that you meet that are involved in your story are people that are necessary to the story. It's the whole Chekhov's gun thing when it talks about NPCs, is that if you introduce an NPC, they need to have a reason to be in the story or in your campaign.
Yeah, that's just the basis of game design there. You don't, and it's really easy that you could get sidetracked by a bunch of random NPCs in a city because there's so many people that, you could introduce your players to a bunch of people that mean nothing. And if you're going to do that, you're basically, it's great that you're establishing the livelihood and the realistic nature of your environment, but it is a poor design as it pertains to storytelling, because it doesn't help the players get from point A to point B. It's it's probably fun to an extent, and then it becomes kind of tedium in that, you know, there's a bunch of people, like, you don't want to have to go to every person as you walk down the street and ask them or ask for a detailed description. Most people in a city, if you think about your day to day, if you live near a city or if you go about your day to day in even a suburban or even a rural area, you probably walk by a bunch of people or drive by a bunch of people that you'd have nothing, you don't pay any mind to them. They are literally the NPCs in your world that don't influence your story. So, you know, treat your city the same way, which is, you know, the people you actually talk to are the people that are important.
Whereas with a rural game, if you introduce a bunch of characters, that's the whole city. That's the whole town that you're in. And so these people are probably important people in the story, even if they aren't necessarily, you know, key players in whatever tale you're telling, because they consist of the whole town in that sort of rural environment. Like we said, cities have thousands upon thousands of people. You can just create NPCs en masse. Don't.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about it here in your notes about some things that kind of like what sort of things are in the story and whatnot. And I like that you've called out kind of the political nature of cities, you know, whether that be, you know, rivalry between gangs, class structures within the city. You know, if you're in the D&D world, you're going to have the beggars and, you know, the aristocrats and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, you still have that in a modern city too. You've got homeless and you've got, you know, affluent people as well. So there's a whole different, there's also, as you pointed out somewhere in here, I read it somewhere, is that there is a very clear delineation between areas that are safe within a city and areas that are not, or areas that you can go to, but you might not be able to get away with some stuff, and areas that you go to and you are watching yourself at all times. Like, it's very easy to, you know, separate where you have strong law enforcement or where your players can kind of go full bore and kind of fight through something and have no problems whatsoever. You know, in a city, you kind of always think about, especially when you go like modern city, you know, if you start a fight in a bar somewhere, unless it's in a weird part of town that people expect fights start in a bar, you know, you're dealing with the consequences of law enforcement at every turn, basically, whether that be your city guard or, you know, your police in a modern day setting. And you have to think about how your players' interactions, if they go into a fist fight, you know, how quickly they need to run away from the law. So.
Yeah. I think politics are a fun thing to throw in an urban environment, because you can have political differences between different groups of people, different classes of people, or just like the city in general, like a big political thing, like somebody running for mayor or for political office. You can have just fights between different bars. You can have, you know, different streets have different affiliations. Whatever it is, it's fun to have. You can have all sorts of stories within a city, and they can all be happening at the same time. You can literally switch between, you know, a murder mystery, political intrigue, adventure to a full-blown horror story and tie it off with a gambling horse race and a carnival, all within the same story, because all those things can be happening at the same time within a city. And because you've got those options, you can use them. Don't just throw everything at the wall. Find a way to make it fit together cohesively. But you do have options when you're in a city. This is a lot different than a rural campaign, because if all those things are happening at the same time in a rural campaign, you know, something weird is going on. And that in itself is the story.
Yeah, they lend themselves good to mysteries too. You know, you think about, like, you know, we talked about mysteries in the rural campaign again, because there is no true, you cannot do this type of story in this setting. Okay, we've talked about genre mashing. You should be able to make it work.
Yeah.
Okay, so your setting will always do it, but there's some things that tend to lend itself better to this type of game. So I like the mystery there, and the intrigue is interesting because you're never short of people that you can kind of throw in the player's way to be the next peg in the mystery. Okay. Again, when you think about the political involvement, like, you know, the mystery can be interwoven with that. So like there's kind of like the layers of your story, which are, this is the story. There's this secondary story if the players choose to go there, and there's this even deeper story if the players decide to go into that. It's very fun in that regard. I also like that you throw out the horror aspect here. It's really not that you can't do horror again in a rural environment either. It's just that it's very different in a city, because in a city, you're tight quarters, everything's close to you. If you do like a zombie game in a city, the chances that you're going to get attacked by zombies pretty high. Okay.
There's a lot of people that could turn into zombies.
Yeah.
But also in a big city, you could be staying in an apartment or a building that's across the street from a big Gothic manor that's just on your block, and it turns out that your neighbor is a vampire. And, whereas a vampire in a rural setting is like, oh yes, there's that count that's up on the hill. We don't talk to him. And everybody knows that they're a vampire. Whereas in a city, nobody might know that their neighbor's a vampire. It's a thing. Horror could just be right next door without you noticing it until you wander into it. And that's fun to find out.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
Well, I was just thinking there's all those benefits to urban storytelling. You've got the things that are close by. You've got the different story types that are like in any direction. Everything is close. You can, like I was saying, I walked out to pizza and I had a beer. In an urban environment, everything's nearby. You don't have to do these extensive travel montages. There we go. You don't have to do big old travel montages because you're just going to be wandering from set piece to set piece. It can just be down the block. It can be a couple of minutes. They could encounter something along the way because there's a lot of things that are happening within said city. Players can have a home base. That's one of the things that I really liked about the Waterdeep campaign, was that the players got a home that they could fix up and work out of.
Yeah, and it also makes the players an integral part of the city. So now you're part of the living, breathing apparatus that is the city.
Yeah, and then they care about their home and their neighbors and the area that they live in, so that they have sort of stake in said city. And as part of that, the players then associated with specific factions. They made alliances with different people or guilds or groups. And because they are part of said faction, they can fight with other groups that have, I'm part of Group A, and Group A doesn't like Group B, so we're going to have a war with Group B. And all these things can lead to some fun, interesting stories that are just sort of like a natural escalation within an environment that has a lot of things going on at once.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot of good, positive things that you can get out of running the city campaign. I think a lot of people tend to gravitate. I mean, again, it depends on your setting and where you live, but if that's something that you're familiar with, like Josh and I are more familiar with, kind of city suburban stuff. I mean, like it's a very comfortable place for our table. Like, people are, that's relatable to them. Again, when you talk about like NPCs and things like that, we've talked about this before, but adding that relatable aspect to your players, I think a lot of people might look at a city campaign and go, okay, this is a relatable thing. Or I mean, even like if you have played, D&D a bunch, or if you play any video games or something like that, a lot of them take place in large, with large city hubs, if you play any sort of open world game. And so you kind of get, again, a lot of relatability just through different mediums in the city game.
I like, if we're going to make a sort of a city campaign, I ran the Cyberpunk game, and Cyberpunk tends to be city based because, corporations fighting all sorts of just like dystopian environment. It's better in the city. We did have a bunch that was out in the desert, and we had some in space, and we had some in some sort of like rural areas, and that was fun, but it always came back to the city. And a part of that was sort of laying out the different areas of the game. You talked about this earlier, in that you've got safe areas and you've got non-safe areas, right? And I think a big part of that is very useful for, like, this is a combat zone. Cyberpunk calls it out. Cyberpunk Red calls it out, like, in Night City. This area itself is a combat zone, and you expect to walk in there, and you could run across gangs, you could run across punks, you could run across whatever, and they'll open fire because cops don't go in those areas. Other places are more safe from random violence, but you may not be safe. And I think, having those different environments and laying them out in sort of a city-wide map is going to be useful for your players, but also useful for your story. And taking your players into different environments throughout your city is going to allow you to sort of give you the same benefits that you'd see in a rural campaign, where a player might travel from the city to the forest to the caves to the lake or whatever. You can do the same thing within the city campaign. They travel from the market to the club areas to the combat zones, and you get different places within the city, but they're never all that far apart.
It's also interesting when you look at a map, like as a player for a city game. And obviously, if you're setting this up as a GM, you should be thinking about how your players are probably going to look at this, which is there's going to be a lot of places that you're going to have laid out on your map to kind of describe the city, like at some point to your players. Expect that the players are going to find intrigue in places that they might not necessarily want to go. And you don't have to take them through every part of the city. But as Josh had mentioned with the Chekhov's gun, as you highlight the whole city, you better have some concept of, like, if they go into this place, which I have identified as a bad place, what waits them there? You better have something for that, even if your story truly never intersects through it. Like, a perfect game does not mean that you have to walk through every area of the city at some point. It's not a check. You're not checking off boxes here. Okay. It's you might go through these 5 sections. That's where your story exists, but player interaction draws you into these other areas, and you should have something, for a little exploration, a little side content.
Yeah. Well, and it's not always just like you've entered a place, you've done the thing in the one place, now you never have to go back. City campaigns are inevitably, confined to that city. And within that city, you can return to the same location for different events. So backtracking is absolutely something that should be done within a city campaign, is that you should see the results of your actions. I think it's a fun way to sort of give your players a taste of what have you done and how does the world change by your actions. Because it's if your players are trying to be good, if they're trying to do the right thing, they can see their good actions really take hold and benefit the area that they've been working in. If they're evil, if they're being dicks, if they're doing bad things, you can see that also manifest itself in the world around them and how the people treat them. because it is that close-knit society.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I agree with that. It's you should be able to see the change in what you do very, very quickly because you interact with it so closely within a city campaign. It's like right down the street. Oh, we did that. Or on the new, who's like, oh, we did that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think this is sort of the fun of an urban environment, is that you have sort of that dynamic world. But like, there's a lot of connections that can be made. There's a lot of NPCs that could happen, stories that are very interesting and varied within the environment. You've got a home base. You've got different areas within the city that people can go to that are not very far away. So you don't have to worry about these long montages of traveling, or, just.
You definitely don't need to make travel interesting. It doesn't mean that you can't do it in a city campaign. No. It just means that, generally speaking, you hand wave through it because it's so close. It's like you hop in the car, you're going 15 minutes away.
When we did the Waterdeep campaign, I grabbed a book that was like random Waterdeep encounters, and I'd roll, and if it was like, I just roll a 20, and if it was like over 10, we'd do an encounter. If it was under 10, we wouldn't do an encounter, and they just make it there. And it was just one of those things where you could just pull from a table of, like, they just ran into a random thing. There's just street vendors, or there's some guy stealing a purse, or they wander into a parade of people doing a thing, or anything. And that's the fun part about a city. You wander down the wrong street, and suddenly you found new shops. And it's different, and it's weird, and things can be whatever you want. But it doesn't have to mean that it's important to the story. So don't necessarily give everybody names. Don't give them huge backstories. Just let your players sort of figure out what they want to do there.
Yeah. Again, you let the players enjoy some of their own autonomy here. In a city campaign, especially, you've got the ability for players to really enjoy their own storylines. This is it's a nice place to do the sandboxy type game, or if you have ambitious players, to have them run parallel stories to your main story, because goals are. Again, because there's a lot of political intrigue, because there's a lot of these other things we talked about that tend to be markers of a city game, you have a lot of ways to have your players have influence to the actual, place as well, like the city as well.
Yeah, in a lot of role campaigns, if your players are traveling to said role environment, they're outsiders. They don't have a stake in the area that they go to. In an urban campaign, if you give them, or they earn themselves, because you're never just giving them something, you need to make them earn it, like a home base, then they have a stake in the city. They care about it. But each of the characters themselves can sort of set up their own story within the city. That downtime part of your game, in between your story beats, is very important because it lets your players do some role playing. It lets your players sort of experience or lay out what their character is going to do outside of your story. And in an urban campaign, they get a lot more options. In a rural campaign, they sort of just have to sort of interact with each other, or find a couple of townies that are doing whatever they want. But in an urban campaign, they have so many options. Like we were saying, there's a story behind every door. There's a shop for every need. There are different places that you can go within a city and expect certain things to happen. So if your players want certain things, they can find it within a city without having to necessarily travel for days and leave the group. They can just an hour's walk and find themselves in a place where they can get whatever they want.
Yeah, precisely. Again, lots of good options within an urban game. Do you have anything else you want to add to this here, Josh?
I mean, I think we hit the big points. Make interesting locations, set up interesting NPCs, but if, as far as your story goes, only give real names and backstories to the ones that matter towards your campaign, so your players don't, go chasing waterfalls. Give your players reason to come back to certain locations, because seeing what happened, how they interacted, and changed those locations is useful and important. To that point, give your players a home base. I think, a house in the city or a guild house or whatever it is, super useful, because your players then have a place to sleep at night without having to set up camp, because, once again, they're living in a city. Where are you going to camp? Having that dynamic world, a place that changes as they invest in different areas and make changes to solve cases, fight bad guys, run bandits out, destroy the big lich that's covering, the north side of the city. Whatever it is, it should make an effect on the city, and the players should be able to see that. And let your players sort of find their own goals that are separate from your storyline. Give them a reason to roleplay. I think there's a real benefit to letting your players sort of roleplay out their characters outside of your story. I've had, my Tuesday night crew is very much, they want to fight things. They want to go in, they want to beat stuff up, and, I'm not saying they're murder hobos. They don't go out of their way to murder things. They will ask questions first before murdering everything. But they like murdering stuff. But if they're given the option to go and do whatever they want, I had a couple of them go off and I'd like to find a club that I can perform at. Or I'd like to, take classes to do a thing. And they developed their skills as an artisan, so they can do a thing. And these are all things that they just came up with, thinking this is what the character would like. And those are things you can do in an urban campaign that you might not be able to do if you're out in the wild.
Yeah, totally agree. So yeah, that's those are our thoughts on making a city campaign, and also how the Pop-Up Spirit Halloween store worked and was run and had a little success there. If you have any thoughts on running a city campaign, or how you if you agree or disagree with any of the points, maybe you say, oh well, no, yeah, you can be very goal oriented in a rural campaign. I don't disagree with that statement. We're making observations about the city campaign. Let us know how you're thinking about that. Level Up Your Gaming Podcast at gmail.com or facebook.com/Level Up Your Gaming. Podcast is on YouTube, so smash the like button there. Otherwise, subscribe to the podcast, your favorite podcasting site, review it, recommend it to a friend, all those good things. And that wraps up for the week. So for Josh, I'm Aaron. Have a good week, everyone.
Okay.